All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. Today, we're going to cover question banks, and I'm going to touch a bit on classic quizzes, how to migrate your question banks, and then new quizzes. So we're going to cover all three of those things today. We do have a moderator with us. So as we go through this, if you have questions, feel free to post your questions in the Q&A area, and Mr. Snyder will monitor that. And if he can answer the question right away, he'll reply. And if not, we will ask the questions aloud and get them answered for you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here.
Unless it's something that needs to be answered immediately, we may hold some of the questions till the end.
All right, Steve, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
All right. So first, we're going to start with classic quizzes and the question banks in there. So I'm going to go down to quizzes and click on that. All right, that should have loaded. And we're going to create our first question bank here in classic quizzes. Now, just as a note, we recommend that you create the question banks before creating the quiz. It's easy inside the question banks to go ahead and add all of your questions. And then that way you have all of the questions for that quiz into one central location. Whereas in classic quizzes, if you were to start just like create the quiz and then start adding questions, those questions automatically get filed into an unfiled question bank. And so if you've created all your quizzes just by adding questions directly to the quizzes, then all of your questions get intermingled between all of your quizzes. So creating an item bank ahead of time and creating the questions in there will not only be a great way to segment your questions out by quiz, but it'll be a great way for you to be able to create group questions and randomized questions and that kind of thing, and we'll get into that. So we're going to create our first question bank inside of classic quizzes. Now, people have already asked us too, when are new quizzes going to replace classic quizzes? And right now there isn't a great deadline. It's kind of been a moving goal. It was supposed to be sometime here in 2020, but it looks like they've pushed that back. So we don't have an answer as far as that goes, but as soon as we find out, we'll of course let you guys know, and we'll publicize that in blogs and emails and all that good stuff. So that we can have enough time to migrate over our classic quizzes. All right, so once inside classic quizzes, we will need to go over to the three dots on the right-hand side. We'll click that, and we're going to manage question banks. And here you can see I have a handful of question banks already created, and we're gonna add a new one. So I'm going to go here to add question bank. We're going to do this one for training and enter. So now I have a new question bank. You'll notice it says no questions. And these other ones that I have created, these are for different quizzes that I've created. And you can see I have everywhere from 5 questions up to 150 questions in here. You do have the ability here on the right-hand side to bookmark these question banks. And what bookmarking will do for you is allow you to see these question banks and other courses. If you just want to do edit training, all it does is edit the name. And then the X, of course, will delete your question bank. So to get into training, we'll do that here. And this is now our question bank, and it's empty, so there's nothing in there. But to add questions, you simply click the add question bank up here. If you wanted to edit the details, again, it's just the name. You can move questions from one bank to another. So if you started creating quizzes and they just put it into that unfiled area, and you're thinking, and then you caught yourself and you want to go and move those questions out of unfiled into a new question bank, what you would do is go into quizzes and then go to those 3 dots, go into manage your question banks. You want to go ahead and create the new question bank as a receptacle for those questions. Then go into unfiled and move some questions over to your new empty bank. Okay. We won't use outcomes this way in aligning it in Canvas at all anymore. We've got a new tool coming out that will be announced soon and how to use that. So we won't be using outcomes in questions or question banks through Canvas. So to add a question, we just click add question, and we can choose, you know, amongst all the different types that you have here. So just for the sake of simplicity, we'll stick with multiple choice. You could put in whatever question you might have, like what color is Steve S's beard? So you put that in there, and then you can come in here and you could say, put in your possible answers, blank or yellow or rainbow or what beard. And you mark the answer and update the question. And so now you have your first question in your question bank. If you were to click on move questions, just to show you what that looks like, you would select the question and then select the bank you want to put it in. And it would remove it from this bank and place it in the other. I'm going to quickly look at one of the other banks that we have. So here's one with a bunch of questions in it. And you can see, you know, you've got move and copy to another bank. So if you're working like for a final exam, there's multiple ways you could do this. You could copy questions from certain question banks and put them into a final exam question bank. Or inside the quiz itself, you could create question groups and pull certain questions from other question banks. And you can do that randomly, or you can do that specifically. And I'll show you a bit about that here in just a second. So on any question that you have in your question banks, another keynote is naming it something appropriate. Just calling, you know, just having it as like question and a number makes them really hard to find later. So you want to name your questions appropriately when you create them. But you do have the edit option here. So you can edit the questions. And you would click update afterwards. And for those who don't know, just because we don't see it used very often, these little boxes here, like the green one and then the red ones, and then these here, these are a way to provide feedback right inside the question. And that feedback will come over from your question bank into your quizzes if you want to go ahead and flush out all that kind of feedback right here in the question bank. So there we've edited that. You can also delete and remove questions here. And as a side note, if you were to look at all of these questions expanded like this, you can only do 50 on a page at one time and that's all you can expand at one time. Okay. All right, so there's our question banks. We have all our question banks. We have questions in the question banks. And let's look at a quiz and how you can utilize that question bank. So if we go to a quiz, and I'm just going to pick one here. It's a classic quiz. If I edit this here, I can go to questions. And so you can see here that I have a regular question that I created by scratch, and then I have a question group. A question group will allow me to pull questions from my question bank. So let me show you what that looks like. So if we say new group, so I'm going to do training group, and I'm going to tell it, and if I want it to do one, you know, like random questions, which is a great way to help prevent cheating. You can create a question bank that has, you know, 20, 25 questions in it total. And then you could say pull 10 questions and you know, worth 5 points a piece. And then that'll give you a 50-point quiz, and it'll pull 10 random questions from the question bank. And since you have 25 in the question bank, then it's, you know, it's more than likely that your students will all get these randomized questions. So they'll have some of the same questions, but they won't be in the same order. And then, you know, they'll have some questions that other students don't have. So it just helps with that kind of thing. And so then I want to link it to the actual bank. So I'm going to set link, and then I can go find, and I'm going to link it to chapter 4, select that bank, and I just have 60 questions in that bank. And since I only have 60, so 10 will be pulled from the chapter 4 question bank and put in here. So I can create a group. So you can have this type of quiz where you have questions pulled in that you specifically want in the quiz. You want to make sure the randomizer doesn't miss them. And then you can pull in groups of random questions from a different bank. And that's important. You don't want to do the questions that you absolutely want and the group randomized questions. You don't want to pull those from the same bank, because then you can get duplicate questions. And if it's only, a 10 question quiz total, a student could end up with the same question twice because you're pulling from the same bank. So if you're going to do static questions mixed with randomized questions, put your static questions in a separate quiz bank, and then only pull your randomized questions from a separate bank so that you don't get duplicates. Okay. So I'll stop right there. Is there, Steve, any questions or anything that we should hit on?
No questions yet. Can you say exactly why I would want to do this? Well, you sort of touched on this. Why I would want to do this instead of individual questions. And
all right. So
yeah, just to be clear,
in a quiz like this, there are a couple advantages of item banks. So I'll start with the basic. And one is that if you create the question right here on the quiz, those questions will get put into an unfiled question bank by default. And if you do that with all your quizzes, you're just going to end up with this giant question bank full of questions that cover all your quizzes, and it'll be really hard to filter out and look at later, or to go back and fix if you want to, change your style of doing them later. It's much more to your advantage to create the questions inside a question bank for the quiz first. Secondarily, when you create groups like this and you pull questions from a question bank, especially if you're, like I said, if your question bank has more questions than you're using in your quiz, that's a great way to randomize this and make sure students don't have the same quizzes exactly. And it will help you prevent cheating a bit. As far as cheating goes, you have the ability to randomize the questions like we've talked about. You have the ability to show one question at a time, and that's in the settings of the quiz. So they can't see all the questions and, take pictures of all of them at once, or something like that. And there's just a couple of ways to help, just knock down the proclivity to want to cheat or share with other students.
So I could have one question bank with 10 easy questions that are all very similar, but at least they get across the same point. And another quiz bank has hard questions in it the same way. So you're getting the point across based on the 10 in each one way or the other. The students are going to understand the concept, right? That's generally what this is used for.
Sure. And yeah, I won't dive too much
later
into pedagogy, but yeah, you definitely have multiple question banks for the same quiz.
Mm-hmm.
And, that way you can create question groups. Let's say, like, if you're teaching a health class, you can create a item bank or question banks on the circulatory system, and then question banks on the respiratory system, and then question banks on the nervous system. And you can pull, 5 questions from this one, 5 questions from that one. And then that way you make sure you get an equal number of questions about each of the subcategories that you might cover in a quiz. This also comes into great effect when you do like a midterm or a final exam, where you can make sure you pull, a certain amount of questions from one area and another. And as Steve was alluding to, if there's certain areas that are, like more important to you, like, yes, this, I want to talk about each system, circulatory, respiratory, nervous system, but in the final exam, I want a few of those. But what I really want is some questions, about the overall interaction and healing process of the body. And so you can pull more questions from that question bank. And that way you can, kind of your percentages to your quiz based off the number of questions you pull in.
Is it possible to import questions from Word or a text editor?
So there is. So yes, there is, and there isn't. So you can build questions in or a text editor, as well as you can, your publishers might have content if you subscribe with them. But the only way to get that stuff into Canvas is with a tool. And sometimes publishers will make full-on quizzes that you can import. So they will create QTI files, that's key from what you're looking for. I mean, they come across as zipped files, but it's called QTI is the standard. And as long as they have those, you can import those zipped files into Canvas, as well as if you had a paid subscription or you purchased Respondus, the tool Respondus, you could take Word files and run them through Respondus into your Canvas course. But that's a paid tool.
And my experience with Respondents 4.0 is you have to have your questions still formed up in a very, very specific way. And in my experience in the past, by the time I've created that Word file in those very specific formats, I could have just as easily copied and pasted them in or done them all in Canvas to start with. So I don't think it's worth the effort, but you could give it a try. Respondus also allows you to, I believe they used to do a 30-day trial, so you could get a copy of Respondus for your computer. In the past, it's only been a Windows application, so you might check into that as well. I don't think they have one yet for the Mac. It's a very old-fashioned program that they've not kept up with much.
Yeah, that's a very good point to point out, that Respondus is very specific in the way you format the questions to make sure that it's a multiple choice, to make sure it's the correct answer, to make sure what is feedback. It's so precise that it is much faster to build the questions inside Canvas than it is to type them out in Word.
Or copy and paste them if you've got them in Word.
Yeah.
But if you put them in question banks, you can use those question banks from here on out, and new quizzes next term. Anytime you want them, you've got them built. It's a tough part. It's like putting contacts in your phone. It's real arduous. You wish you didn't have to do it. But by the time you get it all done, it's just fantastic.
All right. So now for the intermediate step, about, say you've got quizzes and question banks that you want to move over to the new quizzes version. And since today's topic is about question banks, we're only going to reference how to move an entire question bank from old or classic quizzes to new quizzes. So the migration, there's actually like in Canvas a lot, there's multiple ways you can do something, but the one way that we found that works every time is the one we're going to talk about today. So what you have to do is go into quizzes, and you want to create a classic quiz from scratch. So I'm going to create a quiz, and I'm going to delete this later. And it doesn't matter any of the settings or anything you have in here. So, but what you want to do is go to questions, and you want to find questions, and you want to go to that question bank that you want to migrate. So if I want to move this one over, it has 60 questions in it. I'm going to do select all, and I'm not going to put them in a group. And I'm going to say add questions. So what I've effectively done is create a quiz with all the questions from my question bank. So now that they've all been imported, you can see them all have come in. I'm going to go ahead and save this quiz.
I have a question about
Published quiz. So no one can see it but the instructor. The students can't get into this. And now that I've created now that I've got all my questions in one place, I need to create a place to put them in new quizzes. So I'm going to go again to quizzes. And I'm going to go into new quizzes. Now, when you're in quizzes, this solid icon like this, these are new quizzes. The one that's more of an outline, those are classic quizzes. So I can pick any new quiz, doesn't matter which one, because I'm not actually going to be messing with the quiz. So once I'm in the quiz, come over here to the 3 dots in the upper corner, and I'm going to manage item banks. And you're going to create a new bank by clicking the plus bank button, and you're just going to give it a name. So I've already done that. So here I've got my import, and I click on my import, and you can see there's no questions in here. So what I want to do is come over to the 3 dots again and import content. This is where you're going to drag that QTI file that you have from quizzes. And the reason I went to this first is I wanted to mention it because sometimes when you have a publisher, they'll have QTI files of question banks or QTI files of quiz banks that you can import straight into here. For us, because we created that question bank before, we added the questions to that one quiz that we created. We can export that. So if we go into the settings of our course and we want to export course content, instead of exporting the entire course, we want to choose quiz, and we want to choose the one that we recently created that we imported all of our questions into. So I'm not going to do this here during today's demonstration because it takes a while to generate that QTI file. So we don't want to wait on it. But at this point, I've selected that one quiz and I create an export. When that export is finished, it'll be listed here at the top. And you just click on it. And depending on how you set your browser, I've set mine to automatically download so you can see it downloaded here. You might get a prompt in the middle that says, you know, you want to save this file. Where do you want to save it? So once I've saved that file, inside the item banks, now notice that it's got a new name in new quizzes. It's not question banks, it's item banks. So inside item banks, I can browse for that file and I can go to wherever I saved it and it will automatically look for zip files of exports. And once I click open, it will populate all of your questions into this new item bank. And when it does that, it'll look something like this. And you'll see all of your questions populated here. It is important to note that you can only import the questions into an empty item bank. So see, now that I have questions in this item bank, if I go to the 3 dots, the import content is grayed out. I can't add more questions to this item bank. So if you're trying to combine multiple question banks from classic quizzes, what you need to do is in that quiz that you created, that we added all our questions to, you need to go ahead and do that first. So if I wanted to add, 60 questions from this question bank and 40 questions from this question bank, I need to do that all into one quiz before I create that export, because you can't add more to an item bank in new quizzes. All right. So once we've got so now that we've migrated all of our questions into item banks, which is new quizzes, we could take a look at the item bank here. There's a great new search feature in the new item bank. So you could type anything in you wanted, like if you're looking for, questions about Texas, you can start typing and it'll narrow down the questions. This really helps when you have 100 questions in an item bank kind of thing. And you can also put up filters. So if you can't remember exactly what it was, but you want to look only at your essay questions, you can choose essay question type and it will filter out by essay question. as well as in new quizzes, you can create tags or metadata on questions. And then of course you can search and filter by those tags. So here, let's just pick a question. So if I pick this question type, now this question type is called a hotspot. So what I've done is uploaded an image and then I've drawn my little hotspot. And the question is, where is Texas on this map? And so students will click on the map where they think Texas is. And if they're in the blue area, they get the question right. But if they click up here, like on Idaho, they're gonna get the question wrong. For tags, you can come down here to tags and metadata, and you can put in metadata tags like Texas, Indian Nation, hotspot. You know, you can put any kind of words that might jog your memory about the question later, and that's how you can search for tags or metadata in the, on your new questions. Editing a question is very similar. It's kind of the same thing. You click the pencil and you can edit the question. I'm getting this yellow box because these questions all exist in a different quiz that's already been taken. It's warning me not to mess with questions that have already been used. But that's how you edit an item. You can copy and move just like we could in the old question banks. So if you click that, you'll have an option on where you want to copy or move these questions to, what other item bank you want to use. You can, of course, delete your questions, and you can expand them with the little arrow here to see, oh, okay, yeah, that's what I did. And then you can look at the next question. You can expand it down, and that's how you look at them. And notice in new quizzes, too, you have the last update options here, so you can remember when's the last time you edited this particular question. When you're inside item banks like this, you can create new questions on the fly right here. And again, I highly recommend that you create all of your questions inside an item bank to start, just because you can keep all of like chapter 4's questions together or the circulatory systems questions together and that kind of thing using item banks. So let me return to the item, to the quiz, and let me go into item banks. So you can create from scratch, and I'll just run through that real quickly like we did in classic quizzes. It's very similar. So again, new bank. I'm going to create a new bank here. And it is important to note that in classic quizzes, question banks belonged to the course. So if you're team teaching, right, and you have multiple people in your course, then, you know, like you have multiple teachers, like then you can have, everybody has access to that question bank because it belongs to the course. In new quizzes, the item banks actually belong to the person who created them. So if Steve and I are teaching a class together and I create these item banks, Steve can't see them. So hence this new share button right here. And if I click plus share, I can start typing in somebody's name, and then I can find Steve there. And this allows me to share with him. So if I picked somebody like who is not in my class, I can still share my question bank with somebody who is not in my particular class. So it's just a shift in how you think about sharing your question banks. You'll need to share them with the other teachers in your class if you want to, you know, team teach on a quiz, but you can also share them with folks outside of your class that might be in your same department.
Does it duplicate this bank, or can they edit can everybody edit the same one? In other words, someone could change your bank. Is that, or
Yeah,
do they simply have their own copy?
No, it is a shared bank, not a copy.
Okay. So everybody needs to play nice together, right?
Very much so. All right. So I'm going to get rid of this one by deleting it. And it'll, of course, warn you that if you delete this bank, it'll no longer be accessible. But the questions will not be removed from the assessments. That's a change and how things are done as well.
That means if I remove one, quizzes that already have these questions will remain. The questions will remain in the quiz.
If they've been, if they've been created from the assessment, yes. And that's that's also a change in what happens, because if you, let me show you in a quiz. Okay, so remember in classic quizzes, when you created questions in a quiz, the questions automatically got put into an unfiled question bank. Well, in new quizzes, the questions don't go anywhere. They're only in the quiz if you create the questions in the quiz and not in the item bank. So if you're editing a question, you'll notice a new option down here at the bottom called item banking. And this question is not in any item bank. So I can't use it later in any other quiz. I can't share it. It just exists in this quiz. So if you have already created classic quizzes and now you're thinking I want to use banks, you'll have to go into each question and click add to bank and say exist in item bank and then choose it. And then you would add that question to a bank. So questions also exist independently of item banks in new quizzes. So it can be very confusing, which is just why we highly recommend the same practice, classic good practice of creating your questions inside item banks first, and then building out your quiz as far as the questions go. When you build a quiz in new quizzes, when you first get here, you have to create something for your very first time. You have to create some kind of quiz, mainly just the settings. But once you have a classic quiz, once you have a new quiz built and you want to just mess with your item banks, you can go into any new quiz because the questions are separate now. You can go into any of them and go over here to manage item banks and create a new bank for your next quiz. And then you can go back and create the new quiz later. I know it can be kind of confusing, especially because new quizzes are still an LTI tool that is built into Canvas. They are not actually the quizzing. And until new quizzes replaces classic quizzes, this is how we'll have to function. But once that becomes the official quizzing tool of Canvas, I'm guessing sometime next year, we will not have all this back and forth. You'll just be able to create quizzes right from the quiz link.
Well, I ran across something peculiar the other day, and it's just something we don't want people to get tripped up over. Go back to the quiz area, just plain quizzes. When you click the three dots to create a new quiz at the top, well, not create it.
Oh,
all right.
New quiz?
Yes. Okay, so you have this dialog box, and at the bottom it says, remember this choice. If you check that box, you won't ever see this again. And if you want to create a different kind of quiz, a classic or new, whichever is opposite of what you chose, you won't see that. However, you have to go here and reset it. It's not obvious. So just wanted to be clear, don't panic. You can turn it back on so you can, again, make other types of quizzes. Can item banks be moved into question banks, the opposite direction? Does it create a QTI file that will import?
No, not that I know of.
So QTI files can be imported into new quizzes, but you can't export from new quizzes.
Let's look at the settings. I've never gone backwards. Hasn't crossed my mind, but let's see.
QTI file should be a QTI file.
Right, but under
You want to uncheck them all?
yeah, I'm just looking through the
You have
names
too
real
many.
quick. So let's pick let me do this and go edit. Yeah, it doesn't look like new quizzes show up in the ability to export.
Can I use Respondus Lockdown Browser with my new quiz?
You can,
That's new.
right? But right now, so we've got about a little less than 10 minutes left. Any questions about question banks or item banks? Not necessarily about quizzes or new quizzes in general, but about banking.
Someone who left just a moment ago asked a question. I'm sorry that I'm just now asking it. With new quizzes coming, is it better not to create any test banks, but just to wait?
No, because we can use that process that I showed you to migrate over question banks to item banks.
Yeah.
We can do that without, without too much fuss. It really doesn't take that long to do.
Right.
But yeah, I would
Sorry.
continue to work as you're doing, and we can move them over.
I hate that I didn't ask that question while he was here. Well, anyway, yeah, that's so far. There's no other questions.
Okay. So that
When someone shares a quiz bank with me, does it appear in my account settings at the top left of the page, or does it appear within new quizzes, both places, either new quizzes?
it appears inside new quizzes.
Does it ask me to accept that, or does it just appear?
No, it just shares.
Okay. I know that some things ask or tell you that it's done.
Yeah, yeah, with the item sharing, yeah. All right, with just a few minutes left, I'm gonna go ahead, do that, and I'm gonna stop the cloud recording.